and welcome to DigFin VOX, Voices in Digital Finance. I'm your host, Jame DiBiasio. If you enjoy the program, give us a like, subscribe, let the algorithms know. My guest today is Jesse Chenard, founder of MonetaGo, a Singapore-based fintech that is bringing digitization to trade finance. It's a great conversation to understand technology, use cases, and what might be next for transaction banking. Jesse Chenard, welcome to DigFin VOX.
Thanks, James. Nice to be here.
Great to have you. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I talk to a lot of people in fintech. They usually come from banking. You've got an actual tech background. And I think in your early days, you were pretty far away from anything related to fintech. So I'd love just to hear about how you got your start.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out as a lowly Microsoft certified systems engineer up in Canada, basically fixing old 486s and things like that. Managed to get into Linux, which was pretty fortuitous for me. It enabled me to get my first job at an AV company where they were doing online video streaming, which was kind of a new thing, mostly just sort of postage-sized little videos in the corner of a page, and everyone was still on dial-up, but it was pretty novel. As I worked through that company, we wound up doing a company that was related to financial space. Actually, we did real-time transcripts of earnings calls, a product called analystcall.com that ultimately got bought by CCBN and then Thomson Reuters. After that, I had become somewhat of a streaming expert. And so I got hired to work at a content delivery network, which is similar to Akamai. Basically, they help power the internet from the underside. And one of the things that came out more and more was video was becoming a potential revenue center versus a cost center. And how would you do video advertising? No one really had a good answer for it, especially in this emerging technology called Flash, and it was pre-YouTube.
So what years are we talking about here? Early, like late 90s?
Yeah, 2002, 2003, 2001. So I had another client called DoubleClick, and they served banner ads to people and targeted them. And I thought, well, what if you could use an ad server to drive a video player? So I went to my buddy at DoubleClick and said, hey, can I use your ad server to do video? He said, you're crazy. We don't do that. I said, you do. You just don't know it yet. Went to a couple of developers up in Canada that had worked with me. We created this prototype. I took it around to every major media house, and they said, this is great. This is, something exactly what we need. Who sells the ads? And I think I was sitting at CBS or Viacom at the time. And I said, well, don't you guys sell ads? I had no idea about the advertising industry, much like when I got into financial services. And so I wound up merging my company with an ad network that was doing rich media, doing in-banner video ads. And we created the first video advertising network for online video. So it was a pretty interesting learning experience. Out of it, I became one of the foremost experts in online video advertising, did another company after that in the in-image advertising space. A couple of guys that I was advising, they wanted me to become their CEO, so I helped them out. We raised some money. We sold that to another ad network. After that, I kind of got a little bit burnt out, so I just took a little bit of a break. And was advising entrepreneurs. I've always said in New York, you always get these great mentors, heads of major media companies that will give you 10, 15 minutes of their time just to tell you whether your idea is good, bad, or maybe they can help you with it. So I've always done that, giving back. And one of the friends of a friend that I encountered was my co-founder at MonetaGo, Patrick Manassi. And he was working on some Bitcoin related stuff. And I thought Bitcoin was pretty stupid at the time. But he was, a good friend of a friend. So I thought, of course, I'll help him out, looked at it. And that was kind of the genesis of MonetaGo about 8 years ago now.
What's the connection? Because MonetaGo is all about supply chain work, trade finance. It feels a million miles away from Bitcoin. So what is that? What's that journey? How'd you go from, kind of dabbling in crypto into being a supply chain, startup entrepreneur?
So when I first encountered Patrick, he was working on the idea of opening Bitcoin exchanges in multiple different countries with local currencies. And I thought, who cares? You're just selling Bitcoin to people, right? But then I started to look at the markets with my advertising background, the ad network background. It's all about arbitrage and margins, right? Mm-hmm. And I started to look at these disparities in the different dollar or sort of currency pairings. And I said, well, geez, you could use this to do money transfers. And effectively, in a lot of cases, bring it in below the interbank rate by just doing arbitrage across different markets with price discrepancies. So we went about the arduous task. Patrick is a lawyer. So he went about the arduous task of putting together a compliance program. We applied for money service licenses everywhere. Our entire notion behind this was not to be the next MoneyGram or Western Union. It was really more to show that we could be the rails behind this and that crypto could be an effective mechanism for doing it. So we went out, we set up bank accounts in multiple different jurisdictions around the world, which at that time, this is sort of, I guess, about 5, 6 or 7 years ago, was very difficult to do. So we obviously had to have a good button down story. And we started out on our platform path, and we launched, and we had a few users doing, small money transfer, small business, stuff like that. But again, we didn't really want to go about sort of the customer acquisition side of it. We thought we had good rails. So we started pitching it to financial institutions. We actually got quite far with Barclays in their Techstars program for one of their London cohorts. We got all the way to the finalist stage. I went to London. I presented to a room full of people, CEOs from all the different areas that they cover. Everyone was sort of patting me on the back, going, "This is really interesting idea. The way you guys are approaching it." And then their lawyers got wind of it. Their lawyers said, "Absolutely no way can we work with a company that's actively, holding or transacting in Bitcoin. It's against the EBA rules." So we were a little bit discouraged after that. We kind of actually, a few of the team members had to go off and work elsewhere. But the core of us stuck together. I was like, let's get off site. So we went to San Francisco for a month, went through a quasi accelerator that turned out to not be that great, but it did give us a month together to just sort of analyze what we wanted to do. During that time, our managing director from India, he said, "Well, look, I like what we're trying to do. We have a new prime minister, Modi. He's come in. He's talked about dropping, inbound remittance rates and things like that. Maybe we can get this to fly over here in India." So he set up a series of meetings. I flew to India for the very first time. This was about, I guess, 6 or 7 years ago now. And I was meeting with a bunch of different banks, sort of explaining what our thesis was, and India was actually worked out quite well because of the currency controls and what have you. Bitcoin went for a bit of a premium back then. And one of the heads of ICICI Bank that I was meeting with started laughing in the middle of the meeting when I was explaining the path with Barclays and the EBA stance and all this sort of stuff. And he laughed, and I sort of, at first time in India, I thought maybe I committed like a social faux pas or whatever. And he apologized and said, "Sorry, Jesse." He's like, "But if you think the EBA is tough, the European Banking Association is tough," he's like, "Wait,
the RBI."
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, "Oh, okay, really?" And he's like, "Look, this isn't not going to fly here. I'm just being candid and honest with you, but you guys seem to know what you're talking about. Blockchain is something that's very big on our radar. Can you help us with other projects related to blockchain?" And we had already been exploring using Hyperledger and Ethereum and a bunch of different alternate technologies besides sort of Bitcoin Core. And we said, yeah, absolutely. And at the time, R3 was just forming. There was a bunch of different focus in Europe, but India was largely underserved. There was nobody really with international voice speaking to them. And so we kind of became that voice. We went around to a bunch of different banks and said, at first we were kind of thinking a utility blockchain that could do multiple different things, and you've got the single source of record. The question that came back time and time again was, well, this all sounds good, but what does the Reserve Bank of India think? And so they kept hammering the Reserve Bank. We kept going back to the Reserve Bank. They're actually quite accessible, which was quite interesting to learn. And ultimately, they put together through their research arm, the IDRBT, a working group with a number of banks, a couple of the big SI systems integrators, and MonetaGo. We were invited. We were the only fintech and only, I think, foreign company invited. So we helped write the white paper around what types of blockchains would be permissible, private permission, tokenless, things like that. And at the end of it, Dr. Ramasastry, who was the head of the IDRBT at that time, said, look, could we maybe do a couple technical proof of concepts? So we did.
What's the IDRBT?
It's the Institute for Development and Research in Banking Technology.
It's a government thing, or
it's basically the research arm of the Reserve Bank of India.
Okay, great.
So they're the ones who created their interbank payment network and then handed that off to the folks and then NDTP
and CPI, National Payment Corporation, NPCI,
NPCI. Yeah. So many letters.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so fast forward, we kind of had this white paper out there. We had gained some legitimate sort of credibility in the market, and we started really looking for a use case that would work. And lo and behold, we came across the Treds exchanges. They had just launched or were launching shortly, and had this problem of double financing across them. They had looked at a bunch of different sort of possible ways of doing it. One was a centralized body, but that came with a lot of overhead and governance, and they themselves were startups. So we came up with this novel concept of, hey, why don't we just launch a simple blockchain for you guys? The only function of it will be to hash out the details of an invoice, create sort of a unique fingerprint or hash for that. And then you can identify whether it's been funded elsewhere in the network without sharing any of the information. They said, great, this sounds like a good idea, very cost effective because we just charge on a per transaction basis. So that went live in 2018. Around that time, and with the publicity, we had a whole bunch of other receivables financing people coming to us and saying, hey, how do we participate in this Treds network that you guys have created? And that was kind of a light bulb moment for us, that we weren't just solving a problem for 3 clients, that this is a global problem in nature. So we started to then pitch it to the banks, and of course, bank procurement processes take forever. Luckily, I share a common mentor with the CEO of Swift India, and he said, look, I've been talking with Kieran. I know you guys very well. I think maybe Swift should help resell your service in India to the banks here. So that was kind of the genesis of our first Swift partnership. So I met with Kieran. I stayed an extra day, stayed over on a Saturday, met with Kieran in Mumbai, sort of hashed out what a deal would look like, where basically Swift resells our service. So we went through the whole technical vetting, the security auditing, all that stuff with Swift. And then Swift has told the banks now that, okay, this is blessed and okay, and so they trust it. So are able to use it directly through the Swift rails.
And what was it that most attracted banks to use it?
So it's funny. It's the same as when I started that video advertising company, and I'd walk into these places that were bleeding sort of expenses on video sort of delivery. And I'd walk in and I'd say, how would you like to start making money off your video as opposed to losing it? The answer is always yes. Same thing when I walk in, or when our company walks into a compliance or risk management person and department and say, how would you like to reduce fraud in your trade finance book, but also potentially be able to expand your book because you've now reduced this sort of vector of threat so substantially. And again, that answer is always quite resounding. Tell me more. Yes, this sounds good in theory. So yeah, the banks see it as both a way to mitigate risk, also compliance, because they're coming more under a regulatory microscope now in a lot of these cases, and having to sort of even back test their data. So yeah, it's a mix of things. And then, like I say, also, long-term, the vision with this whole digitization or digitalization of the financial services space, this is one key part of it. And so ultimately being able to open this up to broader markets, the sort of deeper markets, as well as de-risking the very high-end transactions like we've seen with some trading scandals.
How does it work? Because if you've got some friends in India, but they're trading cross-border, so how much do you need to have either foreign correspondent banks or regulators in other markets that basically bless the platform or take a note on it, or however that works?
So we've seen a number of different trade finance registries pop up. So we've had ours in India for a long time. UAE Trade Connect has one in Dubai. ITMX has launched one here in Thailand. MonetaGo just won the trade finance registry in Singapore. And interestingly, with all of these projects, everyone's like, okay, well, we just want to solve for domestic first. And then they go, phase 2 is international, cross-border, import, export. But the problem with that is that you've got this one-to-many issue, right? And everyone's got disparate pricing schemes. So in the UAE, they charge dollars, we charge pennies in India. Trade finance registry will charge whatever they charge. ITMX charges whatever they charge here in Thailand, and so on and so forth. Everyone's got separate disparate APIs, although we've kind of come up with an ISO 222 standard in conjunction with Swift for this messaging. But the issue is that if you want us to get effectively true global coverage, you basically have to go one to many and check every single one and register your invoice with every single one, or at least with.
This is a problem with any kind of blockchain, right? I mean, basically, it works great if everybody's on it, but if you only have a few people, then it's just, you're just staring at each other.
Well, and so what we looked at as well was this problem of the global nature, right? How do you do import export? And what we decided in conjunction with, so this has advanced our relationship now with Swift Global, So we're the first API partner, fintech API partner that Swift's ever partnered with. They will be offering access to this, what we call the global hash registry. So instead of having it registered per country, every country registers with the global hash registry, and it's pennies to do it. So there's no reason why you wouldn't. And then that's how everybody solves their cross-border issue. Interestingly, as we've sort of scaled up in India, we've had to move from Hyperledger to Corda just based on scalability concerns. And it's been working fine for us. But when you look at the global nature of everybody in every country around the world, 24/7, registering not just invoices, but bills of lading, purchase orders, warehouse receipts, anything that they might be using in a financing transaction, blockchain doesn't work for that. So we've actually partnered with Google around their secure computing product, which gives you certain elements of blockchain. And that's kind of one of the things we've learned on our journey at MonetaGo. You know, first we were a blockchain company, and then it was, okay, well, no, we're more of a financial services software provider where we're just looking for problems, and blockchain potentially might be the back end of it, to really going, okay, what are the elements of blockchain that everyone is so excited about? One is obviously this privacy notion, right? Where you can submit information to it or request information to it and sort of do a zero knowledge proof where you just get an answer back versus the underlying data. The other is immutability, and sort of being able to trust that data has integrity. You can accomplish both these things using cloud computing and secure computing, and possibly tapping into a public blockchain for just basically timestamping or record stamping. And so that's kind of what we've done for this now, I guess, third generation of our secure financing product, is to take it to basically cloud computing. So it's still distributed all around the world. The information, when it comes into our system, basically goes into a black box that nobody, not even a hardware level administrator, would be able to access. And then the results are then sort of given to the common record. And it solves a lot of problems. One is data localization, because we're not storing data outside the country. It's just simply a hash of that data, one-way irreversible hash. It also solves for a lot of regulatory concerns in terms of where, you know, what data is living where, and consent around that data, because we don't keep it. There's no need to worry about third-party consent and things like that, which is coming into not just effect not into play in Europe, but now also Dubai has a new privacy law as well. So there's a lot of considerations there around that data storage. But yeah, we feel that blockchain is still a very effective tool. It's something that we're looking at for some of the other products that we'll be launching in the next year, and the different elements of it. But I think one thing that the fintechs and the technology industry and the financial services and other spaces have learned is that it doesn't necessarily make sense to run your application natively on the blockchain so much as it does to take advantage of a blockchain that's there and use whatever elements you need for that application, as, you know, sort of using the blockchain as just one component of your solution.
What's the advantage if blockchain is already there, so an Ethereum or something like that that's already in existence?
Yeah.
What are the use cases now that you've gone through this journey, Jesse? What are the use cases for a blockchain? How does it fit in versus using cloud-based, a distributed cloud solution? Pros and cons.
So there's I believe it's out of the spun out of the Consensus guys, the Ethereum Joe Lubin's group. And I think it's called the Baseline Protocol. And so Baseline Protocol is for doing pretty much exactly the latter case that I described there, where you've got a set of records and you want to just basically immutably timestamp them and show that you've got proof of data integrity. So you take your data set, you run it through a hashing algorithm, and then you publish that hash into the Baseline Protocol, which I believe uses the Ethereum blockchain. And then you've got this timestamp that where if somebody comes back and says, hey, has this data been tampered with? You run it through the same hash, and then you point back to that point in time. And then you can prove that it hasn't been tampered with. Stuart Haber, they call him one of the inventors of blockchain. He told us the story about the company that he worked for, I think in the 90s. and they had a service basically of sort of checking data integrity. This is before we had to write once, read many systems, and other things that we've sort of gone by this with technology. But people who are law firms and things like that, or people who patented stuff, IT, IP stuff, and they would give them their data set, and they would run a hash of it, and then store that data set for an extra price. You could actually have an immutable record, and what they do is they'd hash the data, take an ad out in the New York Times, and publish the hash into the New York Times. So on Sunday, the whatever, that data set was there, and you could go back and you could take the hash out of the New York Times, run your data set through it. If the two matched, then the data hadn't been tampered with. So those are to me, the most immediate interesting uses of blockchain. I think setting up a blockchain amongst a group of closed participants, again, depending on the use case and depending how complex the application is and what have you, there's a lot of overhead, there's a lot of communication, there's a lot of computational power, there's potential licensing, and a pretty much a big lack of talent out there, engineering talent, not just programmers, but also systems administrators and DevOps.
Right. So a lot of these consortiums and DLTs that banks and other players have been putting together, often for trade, financial, supply chain kind of uses. We've seen a few of them have already closed doors. Do you see a future for them?
Yeah, so some guys are doing it right, like Contour. Those guys are, they're slow but steady. They've got the right constituents together, and I think that's the key point, right? Is like, can you get a little bit of critical mass and build on that? So we're big fans of those guys. We think that they're taking a right approach. I think where it's Carl, I don't think he didn't start the company, but
Carl Wagner from Contour.
Yeah, Carl Wagner from Contour. He didn't start the company, but he's got a very, very entrepreneurial spirit and a ton of background. And I think that's the key in starting any company, right? You can get a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of money and throw someone into a job. But unless you got someone who's got passion, Carl's got probably 30 whatever years experience in this space. Whenever I ask Carl about something and a story will come up and he'll be like, oh, we did that 20 years ago. So I think guys like that, they're gonna bump and grind and probably come out with something pretty interesting. But yeah, I think longer term, it behooves people to really look at what elements of blockchain you're gaining value from, and can you use a publicly available blockchain that's got a good amount of commerce and validity to it already, versus setting up your own whole group of nodes and things like that, which again, it'll come, but it'll still some time.
Does Ethereum's merge, their move from proof of work to proof of stake, does that make that more attractive for that kind of use case? Or
so Ethereum, there's other chains out there that I've heard of, Cardano and a couple other ones that I think have less price to them. So I think that's going to be the real give and take, right? Because if it costs me
the gas charges,
the gas charges, yeah, exactly. Sorry, but if it costs me $1 one day and $3 the next day and 50 cents the next day, then as a business, sort of, I can't really plan around that. You need some consistency with that. But again, I think that some of these other blockchains out there are going to get there. The problem though is that will they last? And that's the biggest thing, right? Because if that blockchain ultimately goes down, yes, I guess you can have a data storage backup of it, so you could still provide that proof of integrity, but then you're porting to another chain or what have you. But still, yeah, I think it's very early days, even though we've all been working on this for 7 or 8, 12 years.
Yeah. For MonetaGo, where do you see it going? I mean, you've gone through a number of iterations, like I guess a good founder, always pivoting. Where do you see the business going to head in the next year or two? And what does that really say about, I guess, compliance and supply chains?
Yeah. So we're heaving up on fraud. We feel like by getting this network of participants together, and especially coming through the mantle of SWIFT, with that validity, it gives regulatory comfort and compliance and inside risk management comfort. So we think we have a powerful proposition there, especially as people come out to identify duplicate financing. There are other aspects. So in India, we've been doing this since pretty much the very beginning, is we also check into the Goods and Services Tax Authority. So in India, a business is required to file all of their receivables and payables down to the invoice detail with the Goods and Services Tax Network. So with that supplier consent, we actually look in and see that the invoice exists there, that the values all match, that the dates match, all that sort of stuff like that. We also look at the e-way bill. So if it's a physical shipment of goods, we can actually, again, with the supplier consent, log into the e-way bill system, which is basically something that you need to provide, transport goods cross-border there. It shows that all the taxes are covered. We can look into that, make sure that the item descriptions match, that again, the invoice details match, and that it's going from where it says it's going to where it's supposed to be going. And again, these are just data points that give risk management, I think, or risk managers or compliance people a little bit more comfort. So looking at that on a global scale, we're doing partnerships with a number of big data providers. I think some have been announced, some are being announced. But again, I think our real opportunity is to not just look at, you know, the duplicity of the financing, but also has it, you know, is it authentic, and what other data sources can we hone in on to make sure that the oil tanker that's supposed to be going from India to Dubai isn't off the coast of Somalia or wherever it's not supposed to be.
And how do you generate revenue, Jess?
So we do it on a per transaction basis. So as people register documents with us or do authenticity checks against those documents, we charge on that per transaction basis. And for again, it's pennies, less than $1 for that duplicate financing check. And then depending on the data source provider for the authenticity check, it's you know, usually can be dollars, can be pennies as well.
And where is the, I guess, in terms of the profitability or, you know, the financial status of MonetaGo?
Yeah, well, so we're a privately held company. We'll do less than 10 million this year. And we're actively always fundraising as I think most startups are. So we're just about to announce closing of a round in the next, I think, month or so here. So yeah, we're on the aggressive build side of things. You know, I think we have the opportunity right now, as again I said, with this network of banks that we're putting together, some of the largest multinational banks, and the opportunity there to you know, I think continue to expand services, whether it be along the fraud side or along their digitalization journey. So we're investing heavily in that side of things.
Are you finding it a little tougher in this current environment on the fundraising side? We're talking September of 2022, and it's been a rough ride for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I was around in the dot-com crash of 2000 and whatever, 2001, 2001. We raised money. I think we made over 100 VC calls. We wound up getting a pittance of money, but that enabled us to get bought by a larger company out of Boston, which they then injected a ton of cash into us. And so I've seen it. And then I was there when Winter is Coming, 2008. We were raising our Series B, I think, at that time. And it does make it challenging, but really, you know, having been through this, having seen, you know, 100 some odd term sheets, you know, it's really just more, is it investor favorable or company favorable, right? If you've got a good idea, the money's there. It's just what's it going to cost you for that cash. And I think right now we're seeing more investor favorable. You know, people are still writing checks, but they're making sure they're putting in some protective provisions, and they're also, I think, taking a harder look at, well, you know, this is going to be maybe a year or two of this. So what's your next step? Because if your next step is to just raise more money, you might be in trouble.
Yeah. So what do you tell them then? What's the vision for the business?
So we, you know, as we roll out, we've got a number of commitments from some of the largest banks around the world to start using this, you know, pretty much ASAP. Again, some of them are going to be running their historical data through it. And so our revenue ramp hits pretty big next year. So, you know, definitely profitability, again, depending on how much we want to reinvest into the business. Because again, you know, I think this is very early stages. But yeah, I'm painting a pretty strong picture of, you know, all of the pieces have been put into place. Like I said, it's been an interesting 8-year journey, but all of the pieces have been put into place. It's really an execution play right now. There's, you know, as I said earlier, there's nobody saying, oh, this is a bad idea, or your price structure is out of whack, or it's cost too much up front, or anything like that. It's quite the opposite. We've been getting, you know, a fair amount of sort of attention and sort of people showcasing us within the company as something they should really do. There was a press release from Standard Chartered about being the first through our Swift pilot about a week or two ago. where they were pretty proud of doing this and saying that we hope the whole industry adopts this because we need it. So yeah, it'll be interesting, I think, next year.
And ultimately, what do the banks hope to be able to, in a year from now, what do banks like Standard Chartered hope to be able to say about using the service?
Well, so a big piece of what we're doing again with the showing in the historical backdating of the data is showing them what things that have potentially already happened. And we've already seen it just running one bank's data against the sort of the analysis engine, and discovered that they had internally financed the same invoice twice at the same bank. So we're pretty confident the problem exists. We've got some of the brightest guys from the fraud and financial crime space now working with us and sort of helping us identify what these problems are. So yeah, it's the banks, I believe, well, there's a couple of things, right? One is the layering in of these authenticity checks. All these guys are coming to the banks individually right now and saying, oh, there's 30 different API providers out there. How do I prioritize? How do I schedule this? What regions are applicable? Our value prop to them around the authentication piece is plug into us. We'll be connected to all of those authentication sources, and you can just pick and choose. And then I think so that's a big thing is as the plethora of services sort of start to abound out there, how do they rationalize it? How do they have a single point to bring them on? So a lot of the discussions we've been having with some of the major banks have been around, okay, well, can you just aggregate all that and then we use you for authenticity checks?
And that's kind of in the weeds, your business, finding these pain points in the process. In a couple of years, do you have a sense of what this could mean for basically trade finance in general? Do you see big changes happening in how banks approach whether it's letter of credit or on account type of financing?
Yeah, so I mean, I think as we're just one small piece of this digitalization journey. Until we get rid of paper from end to end, there's always going to be an element of potential fraud or misdocumentation, or even just erroneous input of data, things like that. But I think that the long-term effect from companies like Contour, even Comgo and all the different networks out there, the trade finance registry in Singapore, where they're basically making a push for digitization, even just within that own region. You're going to see increased efficiency. You're going to see at the end of the day, if you've got these authenticity checks, you don't have document checkers, right? Or maybe you have them that do it less. They check that the document has been checked properly by the authentication engine or whatever, or only take, sort of outlying cases. So you're going to see an efficiency within the bank. Hopefully that'll lead to improved customer experience, in terms of turnaround times, things like that, access to capital, cost of capital. Everyone talks about the trade finance gap and why does it exist and how do we address it? My biggest belief is that it exists because of lack of digitization. And with that digitization, and if you've got e-invoicing and things like that, which India is pushing out, Mexico's had forever, a lot of Latin American countries have that, where you can start to triangulate the validity of the invoice. You can start to actually, with supplier consent, look at all of the invoices that they've registered over the past and get a feel for, are they a legitimate business or not? Is it in line with the financials that you've been provided? All sorts of things like that are going to start to close that trade finance gap, because that lower end of the market is the hardest to service just because of the KYC cost. But once you've got some sort of centralized KYC or digitized KYC, that goes down. So yeah, I think, obviously, everyone wants to focus on expanding the broader side of the market, big global trade and things like that. But I think, a lot of what we're going to see, and my hope anyway, is that the downstream side will actually also, the knock-on effect of this digitization and this push at the upper end will then knock-on effect will be the downstream banks and businesses and what have you will now get access to more interesting capital.
Great. Jesse, I really appreciate you coming on to DigFin VOX to speak with me. You've come a long way from selling video ad mechanisms to New York broadcasting behemoths. Now you're looking at the trade finance. Anything that you see after, as you're executing on MonetaGo, anything in the future where you see your trajectory moving it?
No, I don't think so. I think this is a pretty interesting challenge right now. You know, as always, I think we're always collaborating with other companies in the space and what have you. But no, this is a pretty good spot to be for the next few years. And then after that, who knows? Maybe I'll go reinvent some other industry.
Okay. Well, I think we'll leave it on that note then. Thanks for your time today, Jesse.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. You have a great day as well. Bye now.
Bye-bye.